In the shadow of the Iron Curtain, imagination became rebellion. Soviet filmmakers dared to dream beyond the stars, while their governments feared what those dreams could awaken. These were not just science fiction films, but coded messages wrapped in cosmic dust and political dread. Prepare to uncover 12 Soviet sci-fi classics from the Cold War that defied authority and redefined the future of cinema. Number 12. Aelita, Queen of Mars, 1924. 1924. Long before Sputnik or the space race, Soviet cinema had already reached Mars. Aelita, Queen of Mars, directed by Yakov Protazanov, was the first Soviet science fiction feature and perhaps the first to disguise political revolution as cosmic fantasy. Released in 1924, it followed engineer Loss, who dreams of traveling to Mars, where he meets the alluring Queen Aelita and sparks an interplanetary uprising. Beneath its Art Deco splendor and avant-garde costumes lay coded commentary about the fever of post-revolutionary Russia. The Martian society mirrored the class divisions of Earth, while Aelita's rebellion against tyranny echoed Leninist ideals twisted by disillusionment. Officials were uneasy. The film's surrealism felt suspiciously Western. Its erotic undertones and fractured narrative defied socialist realism long before it existed. Audiences, however, were mesmerized. The set's towering geometric temples and angular machinery would later influence Metropolis and generations of futurist design. Yet, by the 1930s, Aelita was quietly buried, labeled formalist and ideologically ambiguous. Rediscovered decades later, it became recognized as the birth of Soviet cinematic imagination. What began as a silent dream of space became a warning that utopia, once reached, can look disturbingly like Earth. Number 11. Solaris, 1972. Solaris was no ordinary space drama. It was the mind turned inside out. Director Andrei Tarkovsky adapted Stanislaw Lem's novel into a meditation on guilt memory and faith. While the West was chasing lasers and monsters, Tarkovsky was asking what it meant to be human at all. Audiences expecting rockets got silence corridors and water reflections that felt like prayers. Critics in Moscow were divided. Some hailed its philosophy, others accused it of being anti-Soviet for focusing on spiritual crisis rather than technological triumph. Tarkovsky fought the censors who demanded shorter runtime and fewer religious undertones. He refused cutting scenes of the earth forests, claiming they were the soul of the film. The production was torturous. Sets flooded during filming, and actors endured endless retakes because Tarkovsky wanted truth, not performance. Composer Edward Artemyev created a haunting electronic score using early synthesizers banned for their Western origin. When Solaris premiered it, confused officials but mesmerized foreign critics. It won the Grand Prix at Cannes, yet Soviet distributors limited its release, fearing Western praise might brand Tarkovsky as dangerous. Over time, its slow orbit became legend. Today, Solaris is viewed as the Soviet answer to Kubrick's masterpiece. But unlike 2001, it stares not at space but into conscience. It whispered that even under state control, the soul remained infinite, a quiet rebellion written in light. Number 10. The Andromeda Nebula, 1967. At first glance, the Andromeda Nebula was pure optimism, a bright future of unity and exploration across galaxies. But beneath the polished steel lay a reflection of Cold War exhaustion. Director Yevgeny Sherstobitov turned Ivan Yefimov's utopian novel into something more fragile. Set in a distant future where humanity has conquered poverty and war, it follows explorers trapped by an alien energy field. Yet the real prison was ideology. Their endless teamwork and slogans about harmony masked a deeper question. Was perfection worth freedom's cost? The film's production faced strange delays. Moscow approved it as propaganda, but studio heads grew nervous when early cuts showed the crew doubting their mission. Dialogue hinting at emotional isolation was almost deleted. Sherstobitov secretly reinserted it, claiming technical necessity. Visually, it was stunning for its era. Real underwater photography simulated cosmic movement, while recycled submarine parts became spaceship interiors. Audiences in Eastern Europe adored its sincerity. But Western distributors dismissed it as naive communist futurism. In truth, the Andromeda Nebula was far from naive. It portrayed the loneliness of progress, the fear of losing individuality to collective order. Its ending offered no victory, only endurance. For many viewers trapped behind the Iron Curtain, it felt like a confession disguised as a dream. Decades later, film historians reclaimed it as one of the earliest examples of Soviet existential sci-fi. A story that dared to say perfection without freedom is only another form of silence. Number 9. Ikaria XB1, 1963. Though produced in Czechoslovakia, Ikaria XB1 became a cornerstone of the Soviet bloc vision of the future, a vision far deeper and darker than its Western counterparts. Directed by Jindřich Polák and co-financed through Mosfilm, it follows a crew of explorers on a 25th-century voyage to the mysterious White Planet. What begins as triumph turns into quiet dread as isolation, boredom, and the weight of perfection slowly unravel the human mind. Officially, the film celebrated socialist progress and cooperation among scientists. Unofficially, it warned of what happens when ideology replaces individuality. The spotless corridors of the ship became metaphors for conformity. The crew's polite smiles masked growing existential despair. Censors approved the project for its technological optimism, but never noticed its hidden melancholy. Polák filled the film with silences, slow tracking shots, and faces that looked half-asleep souls adrift in utopia. When the movie reached Western audiences, it stunned critics. Stanley Kubrick studied it before filming 2001, a space odyssey borrowing its minimalist design and eerie tone. At home, Ikaria XB1 was praised, then quietly shelved, its psychological depth deemed too pessimistic. Yet, decades later, it re-emerged as one of Eastern Europe's most influential sci-fi works. Beneath the polished chrome and idealistic speeches lies a chilling truth. Even in the perfect future, humanity's greatest frontier is still itself. Number 8. The Hyperboloid of Engineer Garin, 1965. The Hyperboloid of Engineer Garin began as a simple adaptation of Alexei Tolstoy's novel, but ended as one of the most politically charged Soviet sci-fi films ever made. Directed by Alexander Ginsberg, it follows a genius inventor who creates a weapon capable of destroying anything from a distance. What unfolds is a parable about ambition, corruption, and moral collapse. In a country obsessed with control, this story hit too close to home. Garin's lust for power mirrored the unchecked authority of real-life political figures. Censors tried to hide it under flashy visuals and heroic speeches, but audiences saw through the disguise. The hyperboloid was not just a weapon, it was the metaphor for truth that burns everything it touches. Production was plagued by arguments between studio heads and Ginsberg. The director wanted a dark psychological study, but officials demanded patriotic heroism. Scenes showing the downfall of elites were shortened or replaced with ambiguous endings. Still, the film's visual language remained bold. Angular lighting and claustrophobic sets made the story feel like a fever dream. When released, it drew massive crowds, yet vanished quickly from circulation. State television rarely replayed it. Western critics discovered it decades later, praising its noir tone and prophetic warning about weaponized technology. The Hyperboloid of Engineer Garin remains one of Soviet cinema's great paradoxes, a film funded by the system yet exposing its heart of steel. It reminds viewers that invention without conscience leads only to ruin. Number 7. The Dead Mountaineers Hotel, 1979. Few films captured Cold War paranoia like The Dead Mountaineers Hotel. Directed by Grigory Kromanov and based on a story by the Strugatsky brothers, it masqueraded as a murder mystery, but unfolded into a cosmic allegory about fear and control. A police inspector investigates strange happenings in a remote snowbound hotel. Guests behave oddly, technology malfunctions, and time itself feels unstable. The twist: some of them are not human. Beneath its icy suspense lies a question that terrified Soviet authorities. What happens when obedience meets empathy? The film's atmosphere was suffocating in the best way. Shot in Estonia, its cold blue landscapes became metaphors for isolation and secrecy. Kromanov used distorted lenses and eerie soundscapes to make reality feel like a dream on the verge of collapse. Censors were confused. Was it about aliens or about the Soviet state watching its own citizens? The answer was both. Its alien visitors symbolized outsiders crushed by bureaucracy and suspicion. Some officials even tried to stop its export, claiming it portrayed Soviet order as fragile. Behind the camera, tensions were high. The actors were instructed to behave as if they were under surveillance. At night, local authorities did in fact visit the set. The paranoia on screen was real. When The Dead Mountaineers Hotel premiered, it barely reached audiences, but those who saw it never forgot. It became a cult phenomenon in the Baltics long before the word cult meant rebellion. Its legacy endures as one of the eeriest films ever produced under the Red Star, a mystery where every question felt forbidden to ask. Number 6. Kin Dza Dza, 1986. Kin Dza Dza was madness disguised as comedy. A dystopian satire wrapped in absurdist sci-fi form, it became one of the boldest films ever made in the Soviet Union. Directed by Georgy Danilia, it follows two men from Moscow accidentally teleported to a distant desert planet called Pluk, a world of rust dust and despair where matches are currency and humanity has rotted into hierarchy. On the surface, the film was marketed as surreal humor, but beneath every bizarre scene burned political venom. Pluk was a twisted reflection of Soviet society. Citizens obeyed meaningless codes, social classes were marked by the color of pants, and logic itself bowed before conformity. The joke was dangerous because everyone understood it. Danilia fought censorship tooth and nail. Officials demanded he tone down the social commentary, fearing it mocked the Soviet system too openly. But he disguised his rebellion through nonsense language and alien ritual. Words like coup and Q seemed playful, yet everyone knew they symbolized the emptiness of ideology. The director reportedly smuggled certain lines past censors by claiming they were random sounds. Production was a nightmare. Filmed in the deserts of Turkmenistan, the crew endured heat exhaustion sandstorms and malfunctioning props. Danilia described it as a comedy made in hell. Yet the chaos fed the film's authenticity. Nothing looked polished, everything felt broken. It was the perfect metaphor for a decaying empire pretending to laugh at itself. When released, Kin Dza Dza confused Soviet audiences, but younger generations saw through the absurdity. It became a secret anthem of defiance. For years it circulated through underground screenings because its alien nonsense made more sense than official truth. Today it stands as one of the greatest cult films of all time. A vision of apocalypse seen through laughter and dust. It reminded viewers that when a society loses empathy, even humor turns into prophecy. Number 5. Letters from a Dead Man, 1986. If Kin Dza Dza laughed at despair, Letters from a Dead Man wept for it. Directed by Konstantin Lopushansky, this film was a requiem for civilization itself. Set after nuclear war, it follows a scientist named Larson wandering through ruins writing letters to his missing son. Each note becomes a prayer, a confession, and an accusation. Shot in sepia tones so haunting they felt radioactive, the film mirrored the real anxieties of a dying empire. It was made during the peak of the nuclear arms race when the Soviet Union teetered on collapse. Officials allowed production only because it could be marketed as an anti-war statement. They missed that it was also an anti-system statement. Lopushansky had once worked under Tarkovsky and inherited his spiritual lens. He turned the apocalypse into poetry. Crowds of survivors huddled in basements, quoting philosophy, while radiation burned the sky. These images were not futuristic. They were prophetic visions of Chernobyl just months before it happened. Some crew members later claimed eerie coincidences between the film's script and the real disaster that followed. Censors tried to bury it. State television delayed broadcasts and festivals were restricted. But international critics recognized genius. It won awards across Europe and was compared to Bergman and Kurosawa for its existential intensity. Soviet media ignored it, quietly terrified of what it implied. Letters from a Dead Man became a forbidden elegy for the Cold War's endgame. It whispered what no propaganda could admit, that technology without morality leads only to ash. Today, its images feel timeless. A man scribbling in the dark not for hope, but for memory. Proof that even when the world burns, art can still mourn the truth. Number 4. Planet of the Apes Soviet version, 1973. Most Western viewers know the American Planet of the Apes. Few realize that the Soviets made their own unofficial adaptation years earlier called The Space Traveler's Chronicles, or sometimes referred to as The Soviet Planet of the Apes. Directed by Vyacheslav Piskunov, it was a strange, haunting reinterpretation blending philosophy, socialism, and surrealism. The story followed two cosmonauts who land on a planet ruled by intelligent apes, only to discover that humanity destroyed itself long ago. It was officially based on Pierre Boulez's novel, but restructured into a Marxist allegory. The apes symbolized not racial inversion, but bureaucratic devolution, creatures trapped in dogma, repeating rules they no longer understood. The government initially loved the idea, a parable about the failure of Western civilization. But once production began, they realized the film's true danger. It was not mocking capitalism. It was mocking all systems that turn knowledge into obedience. Lines of dialogue questioning faith in science and politics were flagged as subversive. The final cut was ordered to be re-edited. Nearly 30 minutes vanished, including a powerful monologue comparing evolution to revolution. Copies were destroyed or sealed in archives. Only fragments survived through underground circulation. Behind the scenes, chaos reigned. The set was constantly raided by officials demanding proof of ideological correctness. Actors whispered about missing reels and confiscated props. Crew members later admitted they feared arrest for even discussing its message. Though nearly erased, The Soviet Planet of the Apes became a ghost film whispered about by collectors and scholars. When fragments resurfaced in the 2000s, historians called it one of the most daring lost films in Cold War history. It had predicted that every ideology eventually becomes its own cage. In silence, it told the truth that no one dared to say aloud. Number 3. Stalker, 1979. Stalker was not only a film, it was a spiritual labyrinth. Directed by Andrei Tarkovsky, it followed three men venturing into a mysterious forbidden zone where the laws of nature broke apart and desires became reality. The journey was not toward treasure, but toward the soul. Each step tested belief, fear, and purpose. At first, the Soviet authorities supported the project expecting another science fantasy triumph. But Tarkovsky had other plans. He stripped away spectacle and replaced it with silence, mud, and melancholy. The zone became a symbol of forbidden thought, a place where truth itself was illegal. When officials saw the first cut, they were horrified. The story contained no heroes, no ideology, no happy ending. Production was cursed. The film was shot near an industrial site, contaminated by chemicals. Many crew members later suffered illness, and some died, including Tarkovsky himself. The director insisted on reshooting nearly the entire movie after losing the negatives to a mysterious lab accident. Some called it sabotage, others called it fate. Censors demanded edits, claiming it was too slow and too mystical. Tarkovsky refused, saying the stillness was part of the meaning. He told his crew to capture water dripping on metal, as if time itself were bleeding. The authorities did not understand, but they feared the silence. When Stalker finally premiered it, left audiences stunned. Some walked out, others sat frozen long after the credits. The film became a secret pilgrimage for thinkers and dreamers across the Soviet bloc. It whispered that true faith could only survive outside control. Today, Stalker stands as one of the most profound meditations ever filmed on belief and decay. It remains proof that even in repression, art can lead the soul toward forbidden light. Number 2. Test Pilot Pyrrhus, 1979. 1979. Adapted from Stanisław Lem's short stories and directed by Marek Pistrak in Soviet-Polish collaboration, Test Pilot Pyrrhus turned philosophical tension into interstellar noir. The plot follows Commander Pyrrhus, assigned to lead a mission testing a new generation of humanoid robots designed to replace humans in space. But one of his crew may not be human, and that secret becomes the test itself. What seemed like a simple thriller evolved into a moral confrontation. Pyrrhus's investigation was less about machines than about conscience. Could perfection exist without error? Could obedience replace empathy? For Soviet audiences living under systemic control, these questions cut too close to home. The film's sterile lighting and subdued performances reflected the emotional numbness of a society built on conformity. Censors tolerated it only because it came from a Polish partner studio, but they missed its allegory. Pyrrhus's refusal to condemn flawed humanity became a rebellion against mechanized ideology. Though less known in the West, Test Pilot Pyrrhus has aged like prophecy. It foresaw a world ruled by logic but starved of soul, where emotion became a defect. Its quiet ending, Pyrrhus walking away from his victory with melancholy acceptance, spoke for an entire generation of thinkers who feared perfection more than failure. It was not just science fiction, it was confession disguised as command. Number 1. Hard to Be a God, 1989. Hard to Be a God was the final storm before the empire fell. Directed by Alexei German and based on the Strugatsky brothers' novel, it portrayed a scientist sent to another planet trapped in its own medieval brutality. His mission was to observe, not interfere, but watching humanity destroy itself became unbearable. The message was explosive. It suggested that progress without empathy is a lie and that intelligence alone cannot save a civilization drowning in cruelty. The parallels to Soviet life were unmistakable, a decaying society clinging to control while pretending to seek enlightenment. Censors delayed the film for more than 10 years. Budgets collapsed, studios panicked, and reels disappeared into bureaucratic limbo. German refused to surrender. He shot scenes secretly using scavenged film stock. The production stretched across decades, becoming a myth of artistic endurance. When it finally appeared near the end of the Cold War, it shocked audiences. The world on screen was filthy wet and unrelenting. There were no heroes, only witnesses, drowning in their own failure. Officials called it dangerous and nihilistic. Viewers called it honest. Hard to Be a God became more than cinema. It became prophecy. It warned that power always rots and that enlightenment without compassion becomes tyranny. Critics later called it the last great Soviet film and the first post-Soviet confession. Decades later, Alexei, German's son, completed another version using his father's notes. It carried the same soul, a mirror of despair and love for humankind. It was a farewell to an era that dreamed of utopia but woke up in ruin. Hard to Be a God closed the circle of Soviet science fiction with one eternal truth. When humanity forgets kindness, even the gods weep. These 12 Soviet sci-fi classics were more than films. They were coded dreams smuggled past the watchful eyes of power. Each one dared to question control, faith, and destiny. Their creators risked everything to reveal what could not be spoken. Which of these hidden masterpieces moved you the most? Subscribe, share, and let history's forbidden stars shine again.